Hi, my name is Jacob Zingerling, and I'm going to be doing the adoption of ebooks and e-readers by generation. I first want to just talk to you about what the generations actually are so you have an idea of it. First we have the baby boomers, which are people born in 1946 to 1964. Then you go to Generation X, which are people born in 1965 to 1979. Then you go to Generation Y, which is what we consider the millennials, and those are the people born in 1980 to 1995. Then Generation Z, which is 1996 to 2010. And lastly, you have Generation Alpha, which are people born in 2011 to 2025. So now that you know what the generations are, we are actually going to be looking at how reading has been affected by the coming about of e-readers and e-books. And then we will look at the main thing of how does age play a factor in this really. And then lastly, we're going to look at what the future looks like for all this. So to get started, let's talk about how reading has changed. There was a study done in 2016 by the Pew Research Center. In the study, there was over 1,500 people surveyed, and those were all adults. In the survey, it was shown that about 73% of Americans have actually read a book in the past year, which this number has been going down recently. In 2012, that number was at 74%, and in 2011, it was actually at 79%. So there is definitely a decrease in the amount of people reading books. Of that 73%, 65% of them said they have read a print book, which is actually down from 2011 where it was at 71%. So that could be playing a factor with the coming about of ebooks and e-readers as the younger generations are taking on to them and using them more. Of the 73%, 28% have read an ebook. So that just shows that there's a lot less people that are reading ebooks, but still a fair number of them. And then lastly, there was about 14% that listened to an audiobook, which doesn't play a major factor in this. Um, but it's actually kind of interesting because ebook readership has actually been increasing by 11% between the years of 2011 and 2014. Since 2014, it's pretty much stayed the same. There's not really been a change in that. One of the things that played into this was that the younger generations are actually taking on to the ebooks more because of schools adopting them a lot more, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So one of the things that it looked at in the study was, are e-readers really even being used with all of these cell phones and tablets out there now? And it actually showed that they're really not. E-readers like Kindles and Nooks and things like that really just not taking off. As they showed, most people actually use their cell phones, smartphones, and or tablets like iPads or stuff like that. So that doesn't play a huge factor in the overall by generations. It was just something to look into. One thing that did play in the generation factor was that someone under the age of 50 will be more likely to read an ebook on a cell phone than someone above the age of 50. So there's actually a quite considerable difference in that. As you can see, there is 19% compared to 9% of people that are between the ages of 50 and 64, and then 19% compared to 4% of people that are 65 and older. So the younger generations are definitely moving more towards the reading ebooks on cell phones than the older generations. So let's really look at how this all varies based on a generation now. The Pew study actually showed that age really isn't a huge factor when it comes to reading an ebook. There was across the board, it was fairly even. One of the major things was, of course, reading them on a smartphone or tablet. Younger generations definitely pulled to that more. Um, After looking at all the data, it was actually pretty obvious that since age wasn't a major factor, then I wanted to know what was. And what the major factor really came down to was whether a person actually went to college or not. They said that if you went to college, then you were probably more likely to read an ebook because a lot of colleges use online textbooks and things like that. And when you're doing research and for projects, and you're usually on the internet reading ebooks. So I found that very interesting that age really isn't a huge factor. It was more or less your schooling and your education. So, after looking at the current trends of ebook readership, I actually wanted to look at how it will change in the coming years. That took me to a subject of schools adopting ebooks. A lot of middle schools and high schools across the country nowadays are actually getting rid of all their hardback textbooks and going to ebooks because they're giving all their students laptops or tablets. The reason that a lot of them are doing this is one, it's a lot cheaper to maintain than having to worry about kids ripping or bending books and destroying them. Another reason is also because when there's updates to new textbooks, they don't have to buy a whole new set of them. They can just go on and download the new textbook straight from their website, and it's usually a lot cheaper. So that might actually play a huge factor in the future of generations that read ebooks. I think we're going to see a huge change with the Generation Alpha, which is the people born in 2011 and on up to 2025. As more and more of these schools actually adopt ebooks and doing it, it's going to force these kids into kind of using them and getting used to them. And I think we're going to see a big surge in ebook readership as generations keep having to use them in school. One of the things that was actually pretty interesting with it though was one of the teachers actually did a study of their classroom that were adopting these ebooks, and it was shown that students actually prefer the print books instead of ebooks, which I am the same way. I actually like a hardback physical book than an ebook. The reason they said this was it's just harder to highlight and take notes in those ebooks, but it's much easier to navigate pages in the regular textbooks. So like flipping back between pages or bookmarking chapters. And then at the end of the study, most of the students actually said they would not read another ebook after reading their first one. I found that very interesting. So that might play a little bit of a factor in the future whether or not they're going to read ebooks or not. I think kids are going to get used to them more and more as they're used, and we will see a surge in ebook readership as newer generations come along. So the future of all this is kind of like what I just said. We're going to see a surge definitely with the younger generations coming up and using all these ebooks in school. And we probably won't see the dramatic change right now at all. The generations seem to be pretty steady in what they want. We will probably see e-readers become obsolete as more and more people use their smartphones and tablets to read books. It's just more convenient and easier. Lastly, I just don't think print books will ever really go away. A lot of people really just like that physical holding of a book and being able to read it. So looking back at everything, we saw that right now print books are still the preferred method of reading by a large margin. And then ebooks and e-readers really have not taken off in with the come of the digital era. Age doesn't really play a major factor when it comes to reading. It mainly came down to your education and how much schooling you have, which I found very interesting. We saw that students still prefer print books over ebooks, so that might play a factor in the future generations adopting ebooks. However, I think we still will see a surge in the ebook readership as these younger generations have to use ebooks in middle school and high school. These are my sources. Thank you very much.